It was a quiet evening in early March, the kind where snow falls so softly it doesn't even make a sound when it hits the ground. Inside a small house on the edge of Reykjavik, an old man moved slowly through his kitchen. His hands, rough from decades of hauling nets and mending boats, now trembled slightly as he filled a pot with water. He wasn't cooking for anyone but himself, but still he set 2 plates on the wooden table. One for him, one for her. She'd been gone 5 years now. Cancer, quick and cruel. But every Sunday, without fail, he laid out her favorite blue-rimmed plate, the one with the tiny chip on the edge she'd always joked about. He poured 2 cups of tea, even though only one would be touched. It wasn't superstition. It wasn't denial. It was just habit. The kind of habit built over 60 years of sharing meals, stories, silences. Outside, the world had changed. Drones zipped through the icy air like mechanical birds, dropping off small sealed pods at doorsteps. These weren't packages of cookies or fresh bread. They were meals, or what passed for meals now, smooth, colorless blends of protein, vitamins, and fiber, customized by algorithms that knew your cholesterol levels better than your own doctor. Efficient, perfectly balanced, completely soulless. His grandchildren used to visit every few months. Now they visited through glowing screens that hung on the wall. Their faces appeared in high definition, cheerful and bright, but something always felt off. The pauses were too long. The laughter came a half-second late. And they never stayed long, just long enough to check in, confirm he was eating properly, and log the interaction in their family wellness app. Once his youngest granddaughter asked, "Grandpa, why do you still cook? The Nutripods give you everything you need." He'd just smiled and said, "Some things aren't about need." That night he made fish stew, the way his wife used to, with dill from the windowsill pot and potatoes cut unevenly, just how she liked them. Steam fogged the kitchen window as he stirred. The smell filled the room, warm and familiar, like a memory you could breathe in. He sat down at the table, spoon in hand, and for a moment just looked at the empty chair across from him. He imagined her there, stirring her tea 3 times clockwise, humming an old folk song under her breath. He took a bite. It was good. Better than good. It tasted like home, like time, like love that didn't need words. Halfway through the meal, a sharp pain shot through his chest, like a cold hand squeezing his heart. He gasped, dropped the spoon, and slumped forward. The emergency sensor in his wristband, part of the government's elder care program, immediately pinged his family and the local clinic. Within seconds, a calm AI voice asked, "Are you experiencing discomfort? Help is on the way." But help in this case meant a paramedic drone and a remote diagnosis. His children received alerts on their devices. Vitals unstable. Possible cardiac event. Recommend virtual farewell if desired. One daughter joined the call from Tokyo, another from Toronto. Their faces appeared on the wall screen, blurry with tears, voices cracking as they said goodbye through a digital delay. They couldn't come. Flights were expensive. Work was demanding. And honestly, they hadn't shared a real meal with him in years. What would they even say in person? He tried to speak, to tell them about the stew, about how he'd saved the last piece of rye bread for them, about how much he missed the sound of forks clinking together. But his voice wouldn't work. All he could do was look at the second plate, still full, still waiting. He died before the drone ambulance arrived. Alone, at the table, with 2 cups of tea going cold. The next morning, neighbors found him. They cleared the table quietly, wrapped the untouched plate in cloth, and stored it away. The house was clean, warm, well-maintained, thanks to automated systems that cleaned, heated, and even played soft music at night. Everything functioned perfectly, except for the one thing that mattered most. No one had been there to share it with him. In the days that followed, his grandchildren debated what to do with the house. One suggested turning it into a nostalgia rental, a place where tourists could experience authentic pre-digital Icelandic life. Another thought they should just sell it and donate the money to a climate resilience fund. No one mentioned the table. No one talked about the ritual of Sunday dinner, or how their grandfather used to let them lick the spoon when he made skyr. Those memories felt too small, too inefficient, too human for the world they now lived in. Meanwhile, high above Earth, satellites continued their silent orbits. They captured images of cities glowing with artificial light, of highways emptying as people stayed indoors, of billions of tiny blue screens lighting up bedrooms late into the night. To the stars, Earth was just another speck in the dark. Burning bright, yes, but growing quieter in a way no telescope could measure. Not with sound, but with absence. The absence of shared bread, of passed dishes, of eye contact over steaming bowls. The galaxy didn't care, of course. It never had. But if it could feel, it might have sensed something shifting. A subtle dimming in the warmth that once radiated from human gatherings. Because long before humans built rockets or networks, they built tables. And around those tables they built trust, stories, families, civilizations. Now, piece by piece, they were walking away from them, trading connection for convenience, presence for performance. And no one seemed to notice. Until it was too late. But that night, as the snow kept falling over Reykjavik, one thing remained true. The stew pot still sat on the stove, lid slightly ajar, releasing one last wisp of steam into the cold air, a final breath of something real, something shared, something human. After the old man passed, the world didn't stop. It never does. Life kept moving, faster, smoother, quieter. Within a year, what once felt like a personal loss began to echo across cities, villages, and homes everywhere. Not with loud cries or dramatic protests, but with a slow, steady fade, like a light dimming so gradually you don't notice until it's gone. Food, once a reason to gather, became just another task to check off. Governments, desperate to manage shrinking resources and rising health crises, threw their support behind smart nutrition. Companies rolled out sleek machines that mixed your perfect meal in seconds. No chopping, no mess, no waiting. You'd tap your health profile on a screen, and out came a warm, smooth cup of exactly what your body needed. No sugar unless you earned it through exercise. No salt if your blood pressure was high. No joy unless it boosted serotonin. Carefully measured, of course. Restaurants didn't vanish overnight. They changed. Fancy ones turned into experience zones, where you paid to sit at a table that looked old-fashioned while a server in vintage clothes handed you a plate of lab-grown steak. Tourists loved it. Locals rarely came. Why spend money on something you could get faster, cheaper, and healthier at home? Family-run diners closed one by one. The last bakery in a small town in Portugal shut its doors after the owner's grandchildren refused to take over. No future in flour, they said. People don't eat bread anymore, they absorb nutrients. Schools followed suit. Cafeterias were replaced with nutrient stations. Kids lined up, scanned their wristbands, and received personalized pods. No trading fries for cookies. No spilling milk on someone's homework. No laughing over shared pizza slices. Teachers noticed something strange. Children were polite, well-nourished, even calm, but they didn't know how to share. Didn't know how to wait their turn without a digital cue. Didn't understand why someone might offer them the last cookie just because. At home, dinner time disappeared. Families used to gather around a table, tired from the day, talking about small things. What happened at work, a funny dog they saw, a dream they couldn't explain. Now everyone ate in their own rooms at their own pace in front of their own screens. Meals became private, efficient, silent, even holidays changed. Christmas dinners were replaced by festive nutrient blends with cinnamon flavoring. Thanksgiving? A limited edition pumpkin spice pod. The rituals that once tied generations together. Rolling dough, setting extra plates for unexpected guests, arguing over who burned the potatoes, vanished. Photos from past holidays showed crowded tables, messy kitchens, arms around shoulders. New photos showed clean countertops, single-serving trays, and everyone smiling at cameras, not each other. Some people tried to resist. A woman in rural India kept cooking on her clay stove, inviting neighbors over for dal and rice, even when her own children called it wasteful. A group in Brazil started a Sunday pot movement. Everyone brought one ingredient, and they cooked together in a shared courtyard. But these were islands in a rising tide. Social media algorithms didn't promote them. Governments didn't fund them. They were seen as charming maybe, but impractical, sentimental, outdated. Worse, something deeper began to shift inside people. Without the rhythm of shared meals, the passing of bread, the try this, moments, the quiet comfort of eating side by side. Conversations grew shorter, sharper. People lost the art of listening while chewing, lost the patience that comes from waiting for the pot to boil together. Arguments happened more online, where tone vanished and words turned hard. Empathy, it turned out, wasn't just taught in schools or therapy. It was practiced at the table, bite by bite. Scientists noticed it too. A quiet study from a university in Nairobi found that people who regularly ate alone showed higher levels of stress hormones, even if they were healthy by medical standards. Another study showed that children who never ate with others struggled to read facial expressions. They could identify happy or angry in a test, but not the subtle sadness behind a forced smile, or the warmth in someone's eyes when they said, "You okay?" But these findings didn't go viral. They didn't trend. They were buried under headlines about AI chefs and zero-waste food printers. Efficiency was king, connection was messy, and messiness had no place in the new world. Yet in hidden corners, longing remained. A teenager in Seoul saved up for weeks to buy real eggs just to scramble them with his little sister, something their parents hadn't done in years. An elderly couple in Greece, both widowed, started meeting every Tuesday at a closed cafe, bringing their own food, just to eat across from someone who remembered what olives tasted like fresh from the tree. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Just being there, forks in hand, was enough. Meanwhile, from space, Earth looked brighter than ever. Cities glittered with endless streams of data, delivery drones, and glowing windows. But if you could listen, not with ears but with something deeper, you'd hear a new kind of silence. Not peaceful, not calm, empty. The kind of silence that comes when no one is saying, "Pass the salt," or "How was your day?" Or, "There's more if you're still hungry." The galaxy watched. Not with eyes, not with judgment, but with the quiet awareness of time. It had seen stars explode and planets form. It had watched life rise from oceans and crawl onto land. And now it watched a species that had mastered the universe's secrets slowly forget the simplest one, that to be human is to share a meal. No law was passed banning tables. No dictator outlawed home cooking. It just happened, one convenience at a time, one lonely dinner at a time, until the table wasn't abandoned in a single dramatic moment, but through 1,000 tiny choices that felt harmless, even smart. And the saddest part? Most people didn't even realize what they'd lost. They thought they were gaining time, health, control. They didn't know they were trading something irreplaceable, the quiet magic of sitting together, breaking bread and remembering without saying a word that they weren't alone but somewhere, in a kitchen with peeling paint or a rooftop with string lights. Someone lit a stove. Someone set 2 plates. Someone whispered, "Come eat before it gets cold." And for a moment the silence broke. By 2037, the world had grown quieter, not in sound but in feeling. People spoke more than ever thanks to screens and voice assistants, but fewer words carried weight. Conversations happened in bursts, quick replies, emojis, scheduled check-ins. Real talk, the kind that happens over steaming bowls of soup with elbows on the table and no rush to leave, had nearly vanished. And no one seemed to notice, until a quiet voice from Nairobi began to echo louder than expected. A scientist there had spent years watching how people interacted, or didn't. She wasn't studying politics or climate or even technology. She studied something simpler, how humans behave when they eat together. Her team recorded thousands of hours of meals, some shared, some alone, and compared them with brain scans, stress levels, and social behavior. What they found wasn't dramatic, but it was deep. People who regularly ate with others were better at reading emotions, slower to anger, and more willing to help strangers. Those who ate alone, even if surrounded by family in the same house, showed signs of what she called social rust, like a muscle that hadn't been used in years. When she published her findings, most news outlets ignored it. A few called it quaint. One tech blog mocked it. Turns out Grandma was right. Who knew? But in small corners of the world, her words landed like seeds in dry soil. In a cramped apartment in Mexico City, a retired teacher read the study and cried. She remembered how her students used to gather after school, sharing tamales her mother sent, talking about dreams and heartbreaks. Now her grandchildren ate in silence, eyes locked on glowing rectangles. That weekend she dug out her old comal, ground corn by hand, and made fresh tortillas. She didn't invite anyone. She just left the door open. By evening, 2 neighbors had wandered in, drawn by the smell. No one said much. They just ate, and something shifted. In Berlin, A group of university students started meeting in an abandoned parking garage every Thursday. They called it the table, no Wi-Fi, no screens, just food they cooked together, sometimes burnt, sometimes brilliant, and real talk. At first, only 3 showed up, then 10, then 30. They didn't preach. They didn't protest. They just sat and ate and remembered what it felt like to be seen, not just viewed. Governments didn't like it, not because it was dangerous, but because it was inefficient. Shared meals took time. They created mess. They didn't generate data. Surveillance systems flagged these gatherings as unstructured social activity, a low-level risk in a world that valued predictability. Some cities even fined people for unlicensed food sharing in public spaces. But the movement grew anyway, quietly, stubbornly, like weeds through concrete. In rural Japan, an old farming village revived its tradition of kyotokai, neighbors cooking and eating together after harvest. Young people raised on nutrient pods came out of curiosity. They left changed. One young man later said, "I didn't know food could make you feel held." Back in Nairobi, the scientist kept working. She didn't give big speeches. She just opened her home every Sunday. Anyone could come. Bring what you have. Share what you can. Some brought rice. Others brought stories. A few brought nothing but hunger. For food, yes, but also for connection. No one was turned away. No one was recorded. No one was rated. What made these gatherings powerful wasn't the food. It was the space between bites. The pause where someone could say, "I'm not okay," and not be handed a solution, just a nod and a refill of tea. The moment when a teenager admitted they'd never cooked anything from scratch, and an elder showed them how to chop onions without crying. The laughter that came not from a meme but from a shared, slightly burnt pancake. Critics called it nostalgia, a backward-looking fantasy in a world that needed to move forward. But those at the table knew better. This wasn't about going back. It was about holding on to something essential that was slipping away, and it wasn't just about eating. It was about presence, about choosing for 1 hour to be fully here with your hands, your eyes, your heart, instead of half there across 5 screens. In a world that rewarded speed, this was rebellion. In a culture that measured worth by productivity, sitting still and sharing a meal became an act of quiet courage. Even children noticed the difference. In one community garden in Detroit, kids planted vegetables not for school credit, but because it's fun to eat what you grew with people who helped you grow it. They didn't know they were part of a movement. They just knew it felt good to pass a bowl of cherry tomatoes and hear someone say, "You picked the best ones." Of course, not everyone joined. Many rolled their eyes. "We don't have time for this," they'd say. "The world's falling apart. Shouldn't we be fixing bigger things?" But those at the table understood. This was the big thing. Because if you lose the ability to sit with another human being and share something as simple as bread, what's left to save? The galaxy, watching from its endless dark, didn't cheer. It didn't intervene. But if it could feel, it might have sensed a flicker, not of technology or power, but of something older. The warmth of hands passing a plate, the sound of a sigh released over a shared meal, the unspoken promise that says, "You're not alone." And in that flicker, something fragile but real began to grow again. Not everywhere, not all at once, but enough. Because sometimes all it takes to change the world is one person setting an extra plate. By 2040, the world had become incredibly connected, yet strangely alone. People could talk to anyone, anywhere, in seconds. But real understanding? That had grown rare, and nowhere was this clearer than in the places where big decisions were made. The United Nations building in Geneva still stood, grand and glassy. But inside, something vital had gone missing. Diplomats no longer met over coffee in quiet corners or shared late-night meals during tense negotiations. Instead, they sat in separate soundproof pods, their avatars projected onto screens across a virtual table. Their real bodies stayed in climate-controlled rooms, sipping nutrient blends while AI translated their words, filtered their tone, and even suggested diplomatically optimized phrasing. It made things faster, cleaner, safer, they said. No more misread facial expressions, no more accidental offense from a poorly timed joke, but it also removed the human element, the small gestures that build trust. The way someone leans forward when they're truly listening, the shared laugh over a burnt dessert that eases tension, the silent nod that says, "I see you." I hear you. One spring morning, a minor trade disagreement between two powerful regions over water rights and data access began to spiral. In the old days, leaders might have taken a walk together, shared a meal, found common ground over something as simple as bread and olive oil. But now every message was scanned, every word analyzed by algorithms trained to detect hostile intent. A sarcastic remark meant to lighten the mood was flagged as aggressive. A pause was read as evasion. Within days, what started as a misunderstanding turned into a full-blown digital standoff. Cyber defenses went up. Supply chains froze. People on the ground felt the effects first: empty shelves, delayed medicine, rising fear. At the emergency UN summit called to fix the crisis, the atmosphere was tense, even though no one was physically in the same room. Avatars blinked calmly on screens, voices smooth and measured. But behind the scenes, real people were exhausted, frustrated, and scared. One delegate, after hours of sterile debate, quietly messaged a colleague, "I miss the days when we could just grab a coffee and talk like humans." The reply came instantly, "Me too. But who has time for coffee anymore?" That night, something unexpected happened. A small group of delegates, tired of talking through machines, slipped away from their assigned quarters. They met in a hidden apartment above an old bookstore, a place untouched by surveillance. No screens, no recordings, just a kitchen, a wooden table, and a pot of lentil stew someone had smuggled in a thermal bag. They didn't talk policy at first. They just ate, passed the bread, wiped their bowls clean with the last crust, and slowly, without planning it, they began to speak, not as representatives of nations, but as people. One admitted they hadn't cooked a real meal in years. Another shared how their child asked, "Why do adults always look angry on screens?" A third confessed they missed the smell of rain on soil, not because they were nostalgic, but because it reminded them they were alive. In that room, something shifted. Not a treaty, not a deal, but a feeling, a quiet return of trust. They realized they weren't enemies. They were just tired, lonely people trying to do their best in a world that had forgotten how to connect. Later, one of them stood up, holding a chipped mug of tea, and said softly, "We've abandoned the table, and with it our humanity." No one argued. They all knew it was true. Back in the official summit the next day, nothing changed on the surface. The avatars still spoke in polished sentences. The AI still suggested optimal responses. But something invisible had taken root. A few delegates began adding small human touches. A handwritten note slipped into a digital file, a request to speak off record, a shared memory of a place they both loved. It wasn't enough to stop the crisis overnight, but it was a start. Meanwhile, outside the halls of power, ordinary people kept gathering in secret. In basements, rooftops, community centers, anywhere they could light a stove and set out plates. They called themselves table keepers, no leaders. No rules, just a simple belief that sharing food is how we remember we belong to each other. Government still labeled them inefficient. Tech companies called them resistant to progress. But the movement grew, not with noise, but with warmth. A teacher in Manila started a lunch circle where students brought one ingredient and cooked together. A retired nurse in Oslo opened her home every Friday to anyone who felt alone. In Cairo, neighbors revived the old tradition of iftar tables during Ramadan, not just for fasting families, but for anyone who needed a place to sit. These weren't protests. They were acts of quiet repair, and the world began to notice, not through headlines but through small changes. Fewer arguments in online forums, more thank you messages between strangers, Horizon community gardens. Even corporations started adding shared meal breaks to employee wellness programs, not because they cared, but because productivity actually improved when people felt seen. Still, the danger remained. The systems built on speed, data, and isolation were powerful. They wouldn't vanish overnight. But something had cracked open. High above Earth, the stars continued their silent watch. They didn't care about borders or algorithms or trade wars, but if they could feel, they might have sensed a new kind of signal rising from the planet. Not a radio wave or a satellite ping, but the soft clink of forks, the murmur of conversation, the sound of someone saying, "There's enough for everyone." It wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in a world that had nearly forgotten how to be human, that was everything. The moon was quiet, not just silent, Empty in a way Earth hadn't been in centuries. No birds, no wind, no distant hum of traffic. Just dust, rock, and the soft hiss of life support systems inside the International Lunar Habitat. It was 2042, and humans had finally built a real home beyond Earth. But as one person sat alone in the habitat's small dining module, they realized something strange even out here among the stars. The deepest loneliness wasn't about distance. It was about connection. They'd just harvested the first real tomato grown in lunar soil. Tiny, slightly misshapen, but red and fragrant. Back on Earth, food came in pods or was grown in sterile labs, but this was messy, imperfect, alive. They held it gently, remembering how their grandmother used to say, "Food tastes better when someone's waiting to share it with you." No one was waiting now. Not here, not really. Still, they set the table. Just one place, but they made it count. A cloth woven from recycled fabric, a fork brought from home, and a small photo propped beside the plate, faded at the edges, showing a kitchen full of steam and laughter. They sliced the tomato slowly, letting the juice drip onto the plate. Then they took a bite. It burst with flavor, acidic, sweet, earthy. Tears came without warning. Not from sadness exactly, but from memory. From the sudden, sharp reminder of what it felt like to belong. Later, they recorded a message. Not for officials, not for history, but for anyone who might be listening in the quiet places of the world. "We forgot," they said, voice soft but steady, "that food isn't just fuel. It's memory. It's love. It's the table where we decide who we are." They didn't send it through official channels. They uploaded it to an old open network, hoping it might find its way to someone who still understood. Back on Earth, it did. In a rooftop garden in Mumbai, a group of neighbors paused their work when the message played from a small speaker. They'd been planting spinach and chili peppers in old buckets, laughing about how their grandkids thought soil was just a setting on a cleaning robot. When the voice from the moon spoke about the tomato, one of them wiped their eyes and said, "We should cook tonight." All of us together, that evening they did. No fancy ingredients. Just rice, lentils, and the first greens from their garden. They ate on the roof under string lights, passing bowls hand to hand. No one checked their devices. No one rushed. For the first time in years, a teenager looked up and said, "This tastes like home." No one corrected them. They all knew what they meant. Similar scenes unfolded in quiet corners everywhere. In a village in Peru, elders taught children how to grind corn the old way. Not because it was efficient, but because the rhythm of the stone brought stories to life. In a refugee camp in Jordan, families pooled their rations to make a shared stew, not out of need but out of choice, to say, "We're still here together." In a quiet town in Canada, a retired librarian started a Sunday soup tradition, leaving a pot on her porch with a note, "Take a bowl. Leave a story." These weren't revolutions. They didn't make headlines, but they mattered. Because every shared meal was a quiet act of resistance against a world that had traded warmth for speed, presence for performance, and community for convenience. The systems hadn't disappeared. Nutripods still hummed in millions of homes. Drones still dropped off sealed meals. Algorithms still suggested what to eat, when to eat, and even how to feel about it. But something had shifted beneath the surface. People were remembering. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But enough. Schools began adding table time back into the day. Not as a lesson, but as a practice. Just 20 minutes. No screens. Just food and talk. Teachers noticed kids started looking each other in the eye. Arguments dropped. Empathy grew, not because it was taught, but because it was lived. Even in cities, small cafes reopened, not as museums of the past, but as living spaces. You didn't just buy coffee. You stayed. You talked. You passed the sugar without being asked. Some called it a trend. But those who sat at those tables knew better. It was a return, and the galaxy, it watched as it always had. Not with hope, not with fear, just with the quiet patience of time. It had seen civilizations rise and fall, stars ignite and fade. It knew humans were messy, fragile, often foolish. But it also saw something rare. A species that, even after walking away from its own table, could find its way back, not through grand speeches, but through a shared bowl of soup. One night in 1,000 places across Earth, people lit stoves, set extra plates, and opened their doors. No fanfare, no rules. Just an invitation, come eat. And slowly, quietly, people came. Because in the end, it was never really about the food. It was about the space between two people at a table, the space where trust grows, stories live, and humanity remembers itself. The moon still hung in the sky, cold and distant. But down below in kitchens and courtyards and rooftops, something warm flickered back to life. Not loud, not perfect, but real, and that was enough.